Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a podcast by Practical E-Commerce.
What's going on, Internet? Eric Banholtz here, founder of Beard Brand, and today we are back for another e-commerce conversation. This is part 5 of our series on how to build an e-commerce business. I've got a special guest here, as always. They are all very special. This is Alex Hart with Good Joo Joo. Alex, if you could go ahead and give us a little introduction and tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick spiel on Good Joo Joo. So we're a digital marketing agency predominantly focused on digital acquisition. That means all the channels, all the fun, AdWords, Snapchat, Instagram, you name it, we advertise there. Heavy in the e-com game, everyone from big CPG clients to small-time hustlers with digital download products. We do email marketing and automation as well, but primarily focused on acquisition for the e-com customers. And we're a little shop. We have a partner with an education nonprofit, so we kind of create a symbiotic ecosystem between our clients donating to that organization and just everyone making money and making the world a somewhat better place, hopefully.
So if you guys are just catching this series for the first time, you guys know we're about building an e-commerce business. In part 5, we talked before this primarily about finding your business partners, building the website, writing good copy. And now we're going to branch into making money, which I think is, the big thing to do with any business out there, but especially with e-commerce. And one of the big ways to make money in an e-commerce space is going to be paid acquisition. So, if you want to give us a good overview of the various channels out there and maybe the benefits and the type of customers that are going to gravitate towards those channels, I'd love to hear those.
Yeah, for sure. So, the 1,000-pound gorilla, of course, Facebook and Instagram. Depending on who your audience is, if you skew a little bit older, then perhaps Facebook more so. If you're after millennials, Gen Z, etc., or Beard Brand, maybe even probably more popular on Instagram. Then there's Pinterest. That's specifically for very visually appealing products or, something that you can catch people's eye with, like a cooking recipe, for example, that would lead into you selling cooking products or cooking ware. So that Pinterest tends to be a little bit more narrow in who it's a good fit for. The same thing can be said about LinkedIn. LinkedIn works really well for B2B. It's more expensive, but that's where the professionals are hanging out intermittently between 9 and 6 p.m. 9 a.m., 6 p.m. Let's see. Google AdWords tends to be much less sexy, and people haven't really given it the attention that it deserves recently. I'd say in the last 2 years or so, it kind of really took the backseat to all of Facebook's innovations. That being said, it was less competitive for a while and people were doing very well there. So I've continued to see people do very well there. And that's everyone from, a brick and mortar to a podcast to an e-com game because there's really qualified traffic on Google. So I think all of those are pretty easy to understand. Snapchat's trying to play ball. I had a client on their Pixel beta, which I can explain what that means later. They're just getting started as an ad platform, so good for driving impressions if you have a really young audience.
Cool. And a couple other ones. Twitter. Does anyone market on Twitter?
People do market on Twitter. I was early stage at an on-demand delivery app called Favor, and we did quite well on there, but we had the luxury of posting tweets with just burgers, like greasy, cheesy, beautiful burgers. So Twitter does well. The unique thing Twitter does well for some people. The unique thing that they have the ability to do is some advanced hashtag targeting and actual targeting of a user's followers. So Facebook does something similar, but in a slightly different way. But say you wanted to target all of Beard Brand's audience, Twitter could potentially be a way of doing that if Beard Brand had a huge following on Twitter.
Well, and then, kind of the ones that probably aren't top of mind are, to me, like things like Taboola or like kind of like these content directories. I haven't even dipped my toes into those, so I know nothing about it.
Totally. Yeah, I would not. Those are definitely not for the early stage entrepreneur or e-commerce site, but there's a handful of good ones. Tapjoy has been a good way to just drive, quick impressions and kind of top of the funnel traffic. None of those are very sophisticated at driving actual conversions. So I think of those as a much later stage growth initiative.
Okay. Speaking of, I think that's a really good segue into someone dipping their toe into paid. What kind of strategy should they be thinking about? What kind of return on ad spend? How should they be allocating their resources? How should they utilize different channels?
Yeah, totally. So again, dependent on your audience, I'm going to assume for the sake of the conversation, probably most of your listeners are B2C. So you're targeting consumers. It's not a company, corporation, or an organization of sorts. And for that, Facebook and Instagram. Again, you got to kind of have your ducks in a row. So when I think about what those ducks are, it's creative, right? You've got to have some images that you can turn into a carousel or a slideshow, perhaps a short video or a GIF. You need to have your landing page in order. Obviously, there has to be a way for them to purchase. And you want to make sure that all of that's running smoothly. So one of the things that I find people often overlook is speed of a website, ease of use as far as the checkout flow. So that's something that I talk about with potential clients and run tests for even before an engagement starts. Just, hey, how easy is this? Do we have confidence that someone we get on paid media is going to actually convert and go through all of these steps? In paid media, they tend to be more fickle than your brand advocate or someone who's come to you via referral. So page speed's important, your checkout flow, creative. You're going to have some copy. Hopefully you have a digital marketer who is who's well-versed in that and understands what's going to work. And you want the very last thing that I'd say, and incredibly important, is you want to have all your tracking mechanisms in place. So testing the Facebook pixel, testing the Google conversion code, and making sure that that you're getting it back in your dashboard and seeing what's happening.
Do you have any recommendations for a tag manager to make that easier, or should they just be dumping it into their website?
Yeah, it depends on your website implementation. If it's simple, which I assume, when you start out initially it's pretty simple, I'd strongly just recommend using Facebook Pixel Helper. They have a Chrome extension. So once you install it on your website, and you can do that via a WordPress plugin or actually putting it in the code itself. But once you install that, then you can use this Facebook Pixel Helper Chrome extension to confirm that it is firing when it should be. Which plugin you use for actual tracking depends on whether you're a Shopify site or a WordPress site. But just know that there's always a plugin or an extension that's going to solve your problem there.
What you talked about creative, and I think a lot of e-commerce brands probably undervalue the importance of creative and a strong PPC campaign. What are kind of, it's easy to say have good photography, have good copyright, but what are really some huge mistakes that people are making, or easy wins or easy fixes to generate what would be fundamentally good content?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of I've seen a lot of e-commerce brands feature photos primarily of their products. And that's all well and good, especially if you have a beautiful product like this t-shirt, on a white wall. It's really nice. You need people in your advertising, though. It's really important to be able to make the mental connection between I'm a human and this is what I do with this product. So even if it's, furniture, like you want to sit on it and look comfortable, if it's beard oil, perhaps you want a video of someone applying it. Just however you can humanize your product, that'll go a long way in your creative.
Are a lot of your customers doing the creative in-house, or do they have to kind of budget to work with firms as well, or?
A bit of both. There are people I work with who have very defined brand standards at an early stage because, for whatever reason, they have that eye and that's important to them. There are other people who kind of say, hey, I don't even know where to start. I've made this product that's awesome, but that's as far as my vision goes. In that instance, it's very much an exercise of what do you want your brand to convey at the end of the day and how do you do that visually? Again, a good marketer should be able to extract some of that from you or pass you on to a great creative agency.
Yeah. Speaking of kind of agencies, one of the options for our listeners out there is to take the time to learn all these various platforms and roll up their sleeves and start hacking around and Facebook Ad Manager, or to work with a firm. What kind of advice do you have towards each of those options, and how will you know when the time is right to work with a firm, and what do you actually look for in a firm as well?
Yeah, totally. So I have only seen a handful of founders launch acquisition channels well. It's very much an art. It's kind of one of the things I like to tell people is part of Facebook's strategy is they make the casual Facebook user an advertiser, right? You look at your business profile and you see, boost this post, you're missing out on, X impressions, and it's FOMO inducing. So when you're evaluating an agency, you want to really keep that in mind, that basically everyone at this point has tried to run an ad. And any marketer has tried to run an ad. Just because you're able to do it doesn't mean you understand the finer points of it. So a couple of things that I would ask as qualifying questions. One, do you know how to install and QA, a Facebook pixel? And just hear them out and, understand, try to get a feeling for their level of comfort answering that. Another great question to ask is what is the difference between branding and acquisition? Because branding is really focused around, like I just said, boosting posts. So you're doing this for awareness, you're getting impressions, likes, comments, but that's not acquisition. So acquisition is optimized towards a conversion, towards an add to cart, towards an actual action that isn't kind of one of these vanity, quote unquote, vanity metrics. So definitely ask those two things. If someone just comes in and is like, yeah, I'm going to boost this post for $25 a day, that's a big red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah. Acquisition marketers don't say stuff like that.
What, I feel I guess there's the firms that actually market themselves as PPC firms and are going to know the basics of getting a pixel installed and things like that. I would imagine there's got to be a differentiation between the firms in terms of the value they bring, whether or not they also bring creative with them, or if it's just the management of the platform. Do you know what kind of investment people should be planning to make into a firm?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing is you should not even consider paid until you have your first 100 customers. Ideally, much more than that. You're very limited in what you can do as far as a custom audience or a lookalike audience if your data is limited under those first couple of 100. So that's a good benchmark, and you want an agency to ask you, how many purchases and what's your unique visitors like? What is your traffic? As far as evaluating agencies, it's a hard question to answer because some that include creative actually tend to be kind of stretched too thin. So it can be one or the other. They can be really excellent, and you want to ask for great portfolio samples and case studies to prove that excellence, or they can be stretched too thin as far as trying to do too much at once, because creative and the actual analytics of advertising are different sides of the brain, right? So definitely ask for that. If they're promising you kind of everything under the sun, you need proof. If they're saying like, no, I just focus on this, you hand me the creative and I do all the ad operations and I do all the analytics and I give you beautiful ROI reports, that's a good thing too. You just want to make sure that they're savvy at running those actual numbers. So again, I would never hire someone without seeing a portfolio sample, a sample report even if it's whitewashed with, no client's name on it. I just want to see that they have the ability to consume this data and make sense of it.
Interesting. What is your take on utilizing like a commission fee or I guess like a flat fee?
Yeah. For the most part, I tell people to avoid, there are several different structures. I tell people to avoid a strict percentage of spend. There are some agencies, and we do this as well for some of our bigger clients, where we have a flat fee plus a percentage of spend. And the reason that's in place is because once you're spending, well over $50K a month, well into the hundreds of thousands a month, it's a lot to manage. That's a good structure. The structure that I don't recommend is strictly percentage of spend, because then your marketer is incentivized to spend more money, to persuade you to spend more money without necessarily seeing the results to back that. Really, no one in the game charges hourly. Some people will work for equity, but those are those are basically the structures.
Okay. Do you know what would be kind of a starting point for business's budget? Like, obviously you have the fee of the agency, and if you're working with $50 a day or $100 a day, you're probably not going to have the revenue to justify the cost for someone implementing the ads.
Totally, yeah. So I tell people, generally small businesses, to start between $1,500 and $3,000 of spend per month. So $1,500, very simple math, that gets you 2 campaigns on Facebook and Instagram combined at $25 a day. So what that enables our smaller clients to do is set up dynamic product ads, which are for retargeting. And those will help with like your abandoned cart metrics, right? People have already seen the product, they've already added it, and then they fell off. So that's your way to recover those. And then the second campaign can be strictly what we call prospecting, which is going out and looking for new customers. So those 2 campaigns, setting them up, playing with it for a little while, I think that's a great budget to start with. You're not getting learnings very quickly because you're not spending a lot. So if your business is in, this hyper growth mode where you need to like get enough data to raise money to show investors, for example, that's not your game. But if you're just trying to turn it on and get a feel for it, that's a good place to start.
Yeah. What do you see, like, without giving names of companies you're working with, like, what is a quote unquote normal return on ad spend that someone should have? And the question really kind of pairs in with like the attribution model, right? Like, how is it last click attribution that's kind of in vogue, or is it more of like multiple attribution?
Yeah, that also depends on the level of spend. For the most part, last click attribution, the attribution window varies a lot based upon how much the business has going on. So I have a client who runs a 30-day attribution window. Actually, a couple of clients who are doing that because they want to see a fuller picture, and they're not closing. For example, they're not going to close September until, October is ended. So they really want a fully baked picture. For a smaller startup style, 7-day click, 1-day view is pretty normal. Anything less than that is, I think, not giving you the best picture. And some people exclude views, but that 1-day view is pretty accurate in terms of, I saw this on Instagram earlier. and, I'm going to go buy it tonight when I'm laying in bed and I can't sleep.
Yeah, I would imagine that if you're only advertising on one channel, right, that you can really trust that attribution. But if you're on Pinterest and Twitter and Google and Facebook and, every paid channel under the sun, then it gets more challenging to know where that attribution is coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I strongly encourage people to start using UTM parameters from the very beginning. So for those of you who don't know, UTM parameters is just a little snippet of text that you put on the end of your link, the end of your URL, and those pass into Google Analytics. So you can use Google Analytics as a second source of truth. And they're never going to exactly mirror. That's an important thing to understand. But you can compare what Facebook is telling you as opposed to what Google Analytics is telling you and get a feel for what your referral traffic is doing, what your paid traffic's doing, etc.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess to go back to that last question we didn't entirely answer. I need to stop asking questions where there are like 3 or 4 questions in one. But
it's all good.
But what's like a normal return on ad spend that people, or ROAS for short?
Yeah, that's an important one. I'm sure people want to know that. It varies a lot. I hate to keep saying that, but dynamic product ads retargeting is always basically going to have your highest return because that's really an accumulation of all your initiatives, right? Like that's your email funnel doing well. That's everything. So that I see range in between 4x all the way up to 9 to 10x. Again, and that's also dependent on how many SKUs you have, how much top of the funnel traffic you're driving as opposed to conversion focused traffic. So take all those with a grain of salt. If you're like at a 3x, don't go jump off something. Yeah. As far as prospecting is concerned, it varies a lot as well. You want to be making at least 2x after your agency fee or, your marketing person's salary, monthly salary, not actual yearly salary. Yeah. And ad spend. So 2x after you take out all the costs should be your baseline. And then anything above that's, good and it's gravy. Ideally 3 to 4x, but 2x is kind of the minimum there.
Okay.
At least from my perspective.
Yeah, and I would add that as she said, every business is different. So if you're dealing with a low margin business, you may need to have that higher return on ad spend. Whereas if you have a very high margin product, maybe you can get away with something closer to the 2 or just under 2. So it is completely different. And, at Beard Brand, that's we're in this growth mode. So when we're in a growth mode, we actually have plans and expectations to have a lower return on ad spend because we want to try to acquire new customers and be a little more aggressive and realize that it's not going to be as effective. Whereas if we wanted to just scale back, we could do, the remarketing or the retargeting and only target people who we know are interested in. But, that can only grow your business so far. Speaking of growing business, have you seen any examples of a client that just went from, $100 a day of spend to $10,000 a day of spend?
Yeah, absolutely. One client in particular who has just done a really good job at content marketing. His content's excellent. He has a really good standing in that community. So it was easy for him to scale up. But that's because he did the work to get the unique visitors there reading his stuff. I've never seen, just a t-shirt company start and then be able to spend $10K efficiently. I've seen a few apps scale up very, very quickly, but again, that's because they're doing other things really well too.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, I almost you kind of get lost in these Inc. articles and Forbes article that highlight how, in my industry, for hymns, went from 0 to, millions of dollars overnight. And you see their ads everywhere. You see them on Instagram. You see them even on TV. And I would imagine if you pulled the curtain behind it, they're not even pulling 2X. They're certainly... Absolutely
not. Yeah, all those bright, shiny lights, for the most part, are not profitable. I mean, you could bust out, call it your last 10 purchases. I would dare to say that maybe 6 or 7 of those companies aren't making money. And maybe you're not buying the same things that I am, but I know I've bought parachute sheets. I've bought this like fancy Buffy comforter. I've been on Betting Game recently. There's no way those guys are making money. No offense to them, they're excellent and they do a lot of things great, but they're startups in growth mode.
Right. So like I guess, kind of the strategy there is that they have outside money, right? Someone's given them a check for a couple $1 million, and their goal is to just grow as quickly as possible without regard of that growth being sustainable and profitable. So what the risk is if it's not sustainable, then the cards come tumbling down, for lack of better words.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a VC money game.
Yeah.
However, if someone's bootstrapped and they're running ads aggressively, that's a pretty good indicator that they're killing it.
Yeah. And then when you see that as a bootstrapped organization, I really think like one of the things we should talk about is not just that first sale, but that 2x return on ad spend should be on like your customer lifetime value as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you should, again, it depends on how many SKUs you have, but you should be looking at average order value. You should be looking at lifetime value, particularly if you're a subscription. You want to know, people hang out for 4 months or, even better, 6 months. So churn rate is something else you want to look at if that's your business model. Yeah, I'd say average order value more so in the beginning than lifetime value because you just don't know yet.
Right.
But, if people off paid media tend to be spending around, let's call it 50 for sake of simple math, and referrals tend to be spending about 80, you know that there's something you can do there to kind of better educate paid media about your products. Maybe it's a recommendation engine or, follow-up email saying customers like you like X, Y, and Z. So there's some good mechanisms to up the average order value.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of another interesting part. Like you really need to think holistically about paid. It's not just here's an ad driving to the sales, but what is your conversion rate on your website? What is the average order value? All those things come into play when you make your strategy for.
Yeah, absolutely. User experience is a real thing, and I tell people often, and we'll even turn down clients if they're not where they need to be with their website yet, because there's nothing that an advertiser can do to fix a really shitty website experience other than fix it, right? Like, that's all that can be done is to get in there and get your hands dirty with the user experience. But I can't go around a bad website experience with ads. It's just not a thing.
Right. Speaking of the negative aspect of this, like when should an entrepreneur know that maybe paid isn't for them and they should focus on other marketing strategies?
Yeah, so again, looking at all those metrics, and if you've run ads, you should know what they are. You should have someone telling you what they are. Cart abandonment is huge. Unique visitors to the website outside of paid is huge, because paid can't be your only channel, right? Like that's not something to hang your hat on at the end of the day. Again, because people off paid are fickle and it's a rapidly changing landscape. So yeah, you should have all those metrics and you should be able to know when to call it. And hopefully you have someone on your team who can like make that recommendation as well. Yeah, if your organic people are not converting, then don't mess with paid. Like that's very much like the cart before the horse.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So figure out how to get people to sell, or how to sell people on their own.
Yeah.
And then once you understand that and learn that, then figure out how to tell that story through paid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Acquisition. Have you, I think this is a really interesting topic and one that personally I haven't engaged in, and I don't know if you've engaged in as well, but one of the fastest growing paid channels is actually Amazon. And you can buy ads on Amazon, not to necessarily to push your products on Amazon, but off of Amazon. Have you played around with that at all?
Yeah, so a couple of our biggest clients are are playing that game. It's really interesting. It's rapidly evolving too. I wouldn't recommend it right off the bat. Definitely have your products on Amazon, but as far as purchasing through them, I wouldn't recommend in the early stages. When you're scaling, absolutely. There's tons of growth to be had there. They have been improving recently. It used to be a very siloed, right? Like they were very strict about, they wouldn't even give you customer data. And so they're kind of opening up a little bit. But yeah, it's still evolving.
Yeah. I, as a brand that doesn't sell on Amazon, it just, excuse my foul language, but it gives me a hard on to think about like putting an ad on Amazon and then sending someone off the platform and landing that sale rather than them trying to take over the world and kill independent small e-commerce businesses and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that they have an understanding that that's what people dislike about them, right? So they're trying to pull back the curtain a little bit and get a little bit nicer with e-com. And then that's wise, right? Like if you're doing multi-millions dollars worth of product sales, like you're gonna be on there, but there's a very in-between stage between people who are like, fuck yes and hell no. So you're probably in that in-between stage where they need to play nice with you because there's a lot of growth for them. There's a lot of growth there for them as well.
Yeah. Do you, of all the platforms, do you think there's any kind of like 3 years ago, like Facebook was this gold rush of just like excess inventory, so cheap rates, and Google was that way 15 years ago. Like are there any channels out there where there's just a golden opportunity to stake your claim and kind of get a hold of paid?
Yeah, not so much. Snapchat was really promising when they first released Ads Manager and their Pixel beta last year. That being said, they did an app release and their users, Instagram released IG stories and their user count just sucks now. So kind of a false start on that one. I do think this is real nerdy, but I think the blockchain is definitely going to do something to take on Facebook and Instagram and advertising in general. But what that is, I don't know.
Oh, that'll be fun.
I have some crypto friends who are just nerding out about it, and I don't even understand what they're talking about yet, but it's something will happen eventually. It's probably years down the line.
Yeah, well, I'll be on board for that.
Yeah, same.
Cool. Well, that kind of wraps it up. I want to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Good Joo Joo, it's good, JOOJOO.net. And yeah, if you need any digital acquisition help, email marketing, if you want me to tell you that your website's great or it sucks, just holler at me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your expertise and stories. And hopefully our listeners were able to pick up a couple of good nuggets. I know I did. So I'm excited to, maybe utilize and test some of these thoughts that are swirling around in my head. As always, guys, this has been another e-commerce conversation and multi-part series on building your e-commerce business. This is Eric Banholtz, founder of Beard Brand, signing off. As always, cheers and keep on growing.